Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Jesse, who's saying, I've been using XD since it was called Project Comet. Me too. And it's really cool seeing how far it's advanced and grown over the last few years. And of course, I'll get to this in a second, Adobe Max is coming up next month. Just about 30 days from now, maybe a little bit longer. We have obviously some really cool stuff planned there as well. Hala and Umacorn, Gareth, Masayu, Wade, Anita, Fabian, Keisha, Varun, Stony, Cody, Jamina, John, Laura, Drew, Hassan, great to see all of you. Matthew from Fort Worth, Texas. Awesome. All right, so Masterclass number 67. Man, we've been at this for 67 weeks. This is amazing. All right, Drew, sneaks. Not for me, unfortunately. And usually come Adobe Max, we keep those a little bit on the down low, but you never know. We may sneak something at some point, but that's certainly not up to me. All right, speaking of Adobe Max, max.adobe.com. Head on over there. It's coming up October 26th to the 28th. It's going to be free. It's going to be online. It's going to be a very good time. And we're going to be revealing a ton of new features across all of our applications. We also have, I think, over 400 sessions. And if you hop into, where was it? Let me just go back actually. Right over here. Here's the UI and UX section. And if I hop into the sessions right over here, you're going to notice, I will be delivering the What's New in Adobe XD session. So if you haven't registered for that yet, definitely head over to max.adobe.com, sign up, register for sessions, not just mine, but anything that catches your eye. We're gonna have some good stuff. So my first one will be October 27th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, or I guess 8 a.m. Pacific Time. So you won't wanna miss that. All right. If you remember last week during our masterclass, we started the process of building out this gaming platform for either a television or web or whatever it might be. And we're going to continue that process. We're probably going to stick this out throughout Max. We don't have a masterclass next week, but the week after that, we will be back in action. And we're going to be building out various sections of this particular platform. And if I hop over to Adobe XD, here's where we left off last week. And we started building out the structure of this particular application. And it started off very bare, right? We basically just had a bunch of shapes all over the place. And we started to fill in some images. We started to create some components. I did make a few very small tweaks to this featured section at the top here. Originally, we had some circles going down the right. I decided to change it to some more traditional thumbnails. And then we have our default state and we have our second state over here. And we might just start today by creating that third state. And then what I'm thinking is we're gonna move on and start building out the navigation bar on the left-hand side. And what's gonna be cool about this is we're gonna also be using a component and states, but we're gonna be creating an expanded view as well. So if you either hover over or tap on the navigation bar, it's going to expand, right? So we have right here our featured card at the top, and I am working on the main component. That's the one with the solid diamond at the top left-hand corner. Hey, Richard, great to see you. And like I mentioned, we do have our two states. We have our default state and our photo state. So what I want to do now is create an additional state. So if I press the plus button right over here to the right, new state, and this will be photo 3. And what we want to do now is dive in and start making some of these changes. Now, the first thing we want to do is replace this image in the background. So if I dive into this component, I do have this featured layer selected. And inside of this Creative Cloud library that I'm working on, I do have some images that'll work. pop that one right in there. Maybe this is one of the areas that you'll be able to drive through in this game. I can always double click, move this around a little bit, scale it if I have to. And then because we want to focus, we want to let users know what image is the active one, I'm going to dive in here, grab this thumbnail or this layer, move it on up. I also want to make sure this is even. There we go. And then hop in here and just move this down. So I've included this particular layer here on all of these different thumbnails, and it's just kind of hiding behind the image in the foreground so that, it'll just let users know that we've got a little active area right here, right? And we could also go ahead and enable a drop shadow, a very subtle drop shadow, nothing too crazy. And there we go. We have our default state, photo 2 and photo 3. Now, one thing I'll mention, and so Jesse is saying, I can't believe I binged 66 episodes this past few. Jesse, thank you. I appreciate that. That's a lot of me. I don't know if I would be able to handle that, but I appreciate that. Now, one thing I'll mention, especially on this one, this one's not too bad. This one is not bad. But if you take a look at this one, we've got this text over here to the left-hand side. And even if we were to move it over, I should probably group this, but that's okay. Even if we were to move it over to this side here, it's a little bit better. There's still some accessibility issues going on, right? It's a little bit difficult to read some of the text, especially in this area right here where the white clashes with the white, right? So what we can do in this situation is use a darker background or an overlay or something like that. So with this particular layer selected, I'm going to duplicate it, Command and Control D, and then I'm going to unlink it. So when I drag this image from the Creative Cloud library, it brought it in as a linked image, right? And you can just right click and unlink the graphic. The benefit of that, of having a linked graphic, is that if these images or graphics were created in another application like Illustrator or Photoshop, you can edit that back in that application and it's going to update back in XD, which is really nice. But in some cases, you may just want to break that link because you want to edit things right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and let's actually set a linear gradient. The bottom color is going to be pure black. Top color, we can do pure black as well, but I want to take that opacity right over here and drag it on. Wrong way. Wrong one. I want the top one. That's better, right? And then I can maybe do a little diagonal gradient, something like that. And then if it's a little bit too much, I can drop the opacity of the overall layer just a little bit. 65% looks pretty good. That way, if you take a look, if I turn it off and then back on, it just adds a little bit of contrast there. So it's a little bit easier to see this text, right? All right, let's see. Plamine is asking, let us know, oh, where did it go? I think his message disappeared, but he asked something about what's coming next for XD or something like that. I wish I can tell you. I know what's coming in XD, but can't tell you just yet. But max is, I don't know, 35 days, something like that, maybe 40. So you'll find out very soon. All right, so again, default state, photo 2, photo 3, and in the last Masterclass, we did not wire these up. I don't think we did, but I did rearrange this a little bit, so I may have broken the wires. But basically, in prototype mode, we're going to get to the navigation bar in just a second. We're going to dive in here. We're going to select this card here, and I'm going to click on the handle. So instead of working on two different artboards, we're all working within a single component. So I can simply click on this handle here, and I'm going to choose photo 2. No animation, probably don't need it. Certainly we don't need auto animate. And this one we're gonna do, nope. This one we're gonna do photo 3. And then if I go to photo 2, I can basically do the same thing for our default state and our photo 3. And then finally, from photo 3, we're gonna go to photo 2 and our default state. Jan Eric is asking, is this live or a replay? This is, I think, live. I don't know, maybe nothing's live. Maybe we're all just a replay to somebody living in a simulation. I'm not sure. But as far as I'm concerned, this is live, I think. I don't know. Life is weird. Can we expect a timeline in XD anytime soon? Probably not anytime soon. I know it's something that some users want, and I know it's something we want to get to probably at some point, but it's a very large, complicated project. But I think we're gonna probably introduce a few things that might lead up to that. We'll see. I would love a timeline for some advanced animations, but probably not anytime soon, but I'm not sure. We'll see. All right. So if I go ahead and hit the play button at the top, I can now cycle through all of these photos in no particular order, just like that, because they're all wired up inside of a single component, which is great. All right, so that featured section at the top is looking pretty good. One thing I might consider doing is I might consider, stretching this out so it's almost like full screen, right? Or at least edge to edge. And the nice thing is, because we're working in our main component and our default state, if I dive in here to this featured image, and let's say pull this up a little bit, pull this out to the side, pull this out as well, like that, right? Maybe I'll unround out those corners, and I want to make sure this navigation bar is actually at the top of the layer stack. You're going to notice, because I edited that default state, it applied those changes to all the other states, which is wonderful, right? Now, the only thing it did not apply is inside of the photo 3 state, it did not take the overlay to the edge. And that's because that overlay was added specifically to state number 3. It was not present in state number 1. So XD didn't really know what I was trying to do, obviously, right? But one little change and we're good to go. All right, that looks pretty good. So now we want to move on to the navigation bar. Okay, so Richard is asking, can we get an XD update where we can do a repeat grid in XD that allows you to create circular patterns? So funny story, I think I'm remembering correctly, but in the initial version, not initial version, but like in a beta version somewhere, I think this was showed off by Talon, there was some sort of circular repeat grids type of thing. Didn't make it into the final product. Hopefully one day, but now that Illustrator has it, maybe we can borrow it from them. Who knows? All right. I'm also going to grab the header, move that up as well, and search. All right. Whoop. Perfect. Okay. So moving on to the navigation bar, and I'm just noticing, I'm going to dive in here just for a second, pull that out a little bit. Perfect. Okay. So what we want to start filling this in with some crucial information, right? We want the logo at the top, we want some icons, probably an active indicator, and then down here at the bottom, like I mentioned last week, this is going to be where your friends or your online friends or recently messaged friends or something like that is going to live, right? So starting off at the very top, we want our logo. Now over in this Creative Cloud library, I do have some logos that I've been working with, and I did license from Adobe stock a 3D text style from Illustrator, and I just made some adjustments to it and I saved out some logos, and I can just drag this directly into this square, and if I need to, I can dive in here, make this a bit bigger like that, or I could go this way as well. There we go. Pull this up a little bit. All right, that's looking okay. I'm gonna move this entire thing up just a touch. All right. And then for the actual icons, there are a few ways to get icons into XD. And I've showed this off a few times, but one of my favorite plugins in XD is not the Toy Faces plugin, which is coming soon. No one saw that. You saw nothing. I'm gonna zap you with the Men in Black memory cleanser thing. What's it called? The Icons for Design plugin. So if you don't have access to icons, if you haven't purchased any, or if you don't have any, that were given to you or whatever it might be, you can use the Icons for Design plugin. So let's say you wanted a house. You can go ahead and search that, or home, right? And if you go ahead and click on one, bloop, Where did it go? That's a good question. Well, I think I'm inside of a stack, so it's not going to... There it is. So there's the home icon, right? So you can pop it in here and go on your merry way, which is wonderful. All these are open source, and you can use them in your projects however you wish. Or if you do have icons of your own, you can use an icon library, right? This is Nucleo. It's a third-party icon manager. I have a bunch of icons that I either purchased or were provided to me. So I'm going to be using some of these. This is the Cocoa set from UI8.com. It's a really lovely set. It's a nice, fun style to it. It's a little bit different than your typical icons. You have to be careful with these kind of icons, though, because some of them, you know, this one here is for video, right? But this icon in particular, at first glance, it may not look like a video icon. It's a little bit strange because it's so rounded and stylistic. So you got to be careful. You got to keep that in mind. Someone's asking me about dark mode. No dark mode at the moment. Hopefully in the future. Certainly not a high priority item, especially when you're weighing it off against some of the other features that are being asked for on a daily basis on user voice and that sort of thing. So eventually we'll get to dark mode. It's also a lot more complicated than it might seem. It's not just darkening up some elements. Got to work with design systems. You have to work across Mac and Windows. There are technical things that have to be done. Different teams at Adobe have to be working on it. A lot of different things. Anyways, so for this one, let's search home or house or whatever it might be. And I'm going to grab this icon, boop, pop it into place. And there we go. We've got our first icon, right? And again, you can definitely use some of the icons from the Icons for Design plugin as well. Now the next one, we might want to do something like a grid, or let's see, something like this menu icon. Even though it's a menu icon, it could also work for like a gallery. So if you're doing maybe some sort of a gallery of photos or games or whatever it might be, this one could work here. I'm going to change this to white as well. And the next one down below, this might be maybe our community section. So it might be a section filled with videos or who knows what else, right? So let's try, no, TV maybe, no. I know there was one here that I really liked. It was kind of like a TV, but with like a squiggle on it. It was almost like this one here. I always lose track of all these icons. There's so many of them. I guess while I'm looking for this, in the chat, let me know what your favorite icon library is, whether it's free or paid or whatever it is. Let me know in the chat while I'm searching for this icon. It was kind of like this one. I mean, maybe I can use this one in the meantime. It's disappeared on me. Oh, wait, here it is. Presentation. All right, we're gonna run with that. Pop that in there. And then the next one might be for the shop. Maybe it's a bag. There we go. I'm going to grab this one, pop that in there. Whoops, I missed it. And then finally, we might want a section for our friends. So maybe it be users. All right. So we've got all of our icons in place, looking pretty good. If I take a quick look at the preview, just by adding a few icons, it just starts to bring this entire thing to life. Now, down here, like I mentioned, I also want to add in some of our friends. So I'm going to actually hop over to Finder for a moment, and I do have some avatars here, and I'll just start dragging some of these in. Now, of course, if you are using a repeat grid, which for a situation like this might totally make sense, then you can just drag all of your avatars in at once. And actually, you know what? Let me show you how that could definitely help. So if I dive in here, I'm just gonna actually get rid of some of these. And I've got one of them selected. I'm gonna open up, create a repeat grid. But before I do that, what I might also wanna do is add a little bit of an indicator over top of it, whether or not, this user is online. Now, one thing I just did, right? What is going on, right? The reason that happened is because this friends group here has a stack enabled. So when I created that new shape, it added that icon or shape above it because that's where I was creating it, and it pushed everything else down. So it's doing exactly what it was supposed to be doing. I'm actually going to turn stacking off. And then, there we go. Now I still have stacking on the overall group, so that's why the navigation bar is kind of pushing down at the bottom. I'm going to give a little bit of a border. And for this one, we're going to do, let's do like a green, so this user is online. And I might want to round out these corners either a little bit or a lot, but what you're going to see in a second is that the repeat grid will be able to push those styling changes across all the cells, right? So I now have my user template ready to go, right? So I'm going to select both of these elements, hit the repeat grid button at the top, and all together now, boop. And I'll pull out a few down, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe I'll do 4. And then we're actually going to do one more icon down here in a second, which will be to add another friend to your list, right? Yeah, I think 24 could work, potentially. Might be a bit too much, but we'll see. And then right below here, we might want that additional icon. There we go. And we'll get to the styling of that in a second. But like I mentioned, because we now have a repeat grid, if I hop over to Finder and I'll grab this image here and let's say that one, and I need one more. That one looks pretty good. And I'll drag all 4 of these directly into the grid and it's going to populate beautifully. Now, a few things to note is if I dive in here and I change the corner radius of this particular shape, you're going to notice it pushes those changes beautifully to all the other cells, which is great, right? However, there may be times where you don't want a styling change to push, right? We have these indicators to let us know whether the user is online or offline. And if I go down to maybe this user here and I change this to red, you're going to notice it pushed that to all the other cells. And the repeat grid is doing exactly what it should be doing. That's what a repeat grid does, right? But in this case, we don't necessarily want that. And that's where components comes into play. So if I go to any of the cells and I grab this status indicator and I turn this into a component, Command and Control R or the plus button within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to turn this into a component. And because this is inside of a repeat grid, it automatically converts it into an instance. And the beauty of that is that they're automatically overridable because that's what components do, right? So even though they're inside of a repeat grid, I can now go in here, change this to red, and it's only going to affect this one, right? And this one I might want to change to gray. Maybe this user's offline. Maybe this one's yellow because they're away. Something like that, right? There we go. All right, Jesse says, sort of loving the feather icons. Yeah, feather is great. It's they're nice soft look. And I think I saw Richard saying, I saw Richard saying something about, oh, the Noun Project. Yeah, the Noun Project has some pretty good icons as well. All right. And then down here, we may want a very quick, simple icon to add a user, right? Now we already have this icon here, so we can definitely use this. Now you're going to notice if I pop this in here, because a stack is enabled, it's going to kind of move things around, especially if I push this down, that whole bottom section is going to move on up. So definitely keep that in mind, right? And this guy here might not need a fill, might want to keep a very simple, subtle border. And maybe I'll also experiment with the dashes and gaps. Ooh, that could be fun, right? And I'll change the fill of this just to match. All right, I think that could work. I do want to change this a little bit. It's a little bit too boring. All right. That could do. I can definitely tweak this for hours to get it perfect, but we're going to move on. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning, one thing we want to do for this particular navigation bar is create an expanded state. So again, when you hover over top of it, it's going to go from this collapsed view to an expanded view. And what we'll want to do to prepare that is get all the layers ready to go. So I'm going to start by dragging out a guide, or I can just take, I'll keep that guide there. I'm going to drag out a guide so it snaps to the right-hand side of this navigation bar. And Outlook, for some reason, is deciding to update even though it's not even open. All right, great. Thanks, Outlook. And what we want to do now is add all the elements that are going to be visible when the navigation bar expands, right? So I'm going to actually dive in here, grab the container, move it on out a little bit. Now, what you're noticing, because we have a stack enabled, it might complicate things, especially when we're going to be creating that expanded view. So now that I have everything looking pretty good in this navigation bar, I'm actually going to turn the stack off. So I can pull this up, I can pull this up a little bit, and then I can pull this out so we have a little bit more room to add our other elements. I'm gonna make sure that this header is below, perfect. And over to the right of each of these icons, we may also want to include the name, right? So I'm gonna just jump in here. Now I do have a stack enabled here as well. Pull that out. Home. And usually for navigation bars and things like this, you want to stay very simple. You don't want to go too crazy with the styling. Probably want to stay away from serif typefaces, but something like Museo Sans could work quite well. And I'm going to drop the weight a little bit. Definitely want to drop the size of the text. Character spacing set to 0. It's probably still too large. Let's take a quick look. Oh yeah, that's way too large. Let's try about 16. That's a bit better. I might even try 14. That could do. I think that could work. All right, so we have one navigation item looking pretty good. I'm gonna copy that, hop into here. And of course, ideally, you would probably have done these navigation items while you were adding the icons, so everything's a little bit, makes a little bit more sense. But sometimes as designers, we don't really think of these things as we're going, and new ideas pop up all the time. Now this might be your library of games, so I'll pop that one there. Whoa, I don't even know what I just spelled. Community. And this one here is going to be our shop. And then finally, we have our friends down at the bottom. Perfect. So if I take a quick look at that, navigation links are looking okay. I would also, I would consider probably dropping the size a little bit more. They do look a touch large, not terrible, but still a touch large. And the nice thing is, if we do use our character style, so if I add this particular text layer as a character style, I can right click, press edit, and then just drop the size, and all of them will drop at the same time, which is great. All right, so that's looking pretty good. But like I mentioned, we don't want these displayed initially in the collapsed view. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to dive into these and just move them outwards a little bit. And I'm going to stagger them a touch, so that as they come into view, if you look closely, once we actually get to the animation, they'll kind of come in at different speeds. They won't actually come in at different speeds, but there'll be that perception of it, right? And then down here, we may want to do basically the same thing, but for our friends. So I'm gonna just grab some names. There's Laura in there. And then we've got Chris and Victor and Jesse. And just like I did with the links at the top, I'm also going to stagger these as well. All right. Now, one more thing that we're going to definitely want to do is hide everything that we don't want seen. Because if I grab this container and bring it on back to this guide here, we still have these names and we have these navigation links kind of floating in space. So what we can actually do is use this container, right, as a mask. So if I duplicate Command and Control D, I'm going to move this up to the top. And I want to make sure it's above everything that's going to be inside of this container, right? So I have this selected. I'm going to name this mask. You don't have to name it mask. It just might help for organizational purposes. And then you're going to go ahead and select all the elements below it. So you can hold down your Shift key, click on the last one, and then under the object menu, mask with shape. And then if you actually grab the mask and the container and drag that on back, you're going to notice if you click away, all of those links are now gone, which is exactly what we want. So basically everything that's outside of the mask that we just pulled in is no longer visible and will be visible once the second state is created. And I think we're in a pretty good spot to create that component and second state. So I do have the navigation bar selected. And I can actually ungroup this now that everything is contained inside of this mask. And then within the Properties Inspector or within your document assets, you can create a component. And we've already done the work in creating that first default state. So I'll go ahead and create a new state. Now, because we were kind of exploring, do we want to do a hover effect? Do we want to do a toggle state or whatever it might be? Let's try a hover state. So when we move our mouse over top of the navigation bar, it'll automatically expand. And what's nice about this is it'll automatically be wired up, right? So I'll go ahead and choose that. Don't really need to focus on the name. And now that our state has been created and active, we can dive in here and make the changes. So I'm going to grab the mask and the container and pull this on out a little bit. And then I'm going to move these back. So we'll do about 16 might be a bit too squishy, maybe 24-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'll drag out a guide just to help me out. There we go. And then that one over there. And then these, I'm going to drag that over. And I can actually select all of these inside of the Layers panel and then use the alignment and distribution options at the top. And I may actually want to just drag this back a little bit so it's not too large. And that could work. I do think the icons are a little bit too large, but that's okay. It's something we can very easily change later on. And because we're using a component and a default state, it'll be a very simple change, right? So if I do hop back to that default state and press the play button at the top, I can now hover my mouse over top and that animation kicks off, right? And you're noticing that those links kind of come in at different speeds, or at least it looks like it, right? Which is nice. And I do want to make a little change here. I'm going to grab this line, pull that out as well. There we go. And there may also be maybe a settings icon that we might want to display at the top right-hand corner of this navigation bar. Now, one thing you'll probably want to do is add it to the default state so that it also adds to any of the other states that might be available. So if I hop over to Nucleo one more time, look up something like settings, maybe this, this icon up here looks okay. Any one of these should work. I'm going to dive into the navigation bar, change that color to white, right? And if I take a look at my hover state, that icon is, if I can select it, is right there. I'll just move it on over. So one more time, view, there it is, right? Now, one more thing we might want to add is an active indicator. just to let users know which screen they're on. Because if you take a look at this right now, all the icons look exactly the same. So it's not apparent that this user is on the home screen. So still in the default state. And Laura's saying, what's the purpose of the invisible rectangles around the menus in the navigation bars? Oh, so that's a good question, Laura. So if I dive in here, you're probably asking about the rectangles that are part of these masks. And the reason that happened is, yeah, as Jesse says, I believe it's the mask. Because I created a shape at the very beginning when I was laying everything out, and then I took an SVG from Nucleo and dragged it in, it created automatically an object mask. Now, that's not necessary, so you don't really need that there. I could definitely ungroup it, but it also helps with selections, and it also helps with tapping and prototyping and things like that. Because if you have an icon, won't really come into play with these icons, but if you have very thin border-based icons, sometimes a little bit difficult to select and tap on. But if you have like an invisible rectangle around it, it makes it a lot easier. But yeah, these masks are not necessary. They were just automatically created when I dragged in that SVG, so it contained it inside of that shape. All right, so again, I want to create, I'm actually going to turn the stack off for now. I want to create an active indicator. So I'm going to grab the rectangle, draw one out like that. I'm going to move it behind these icons. And I'm thinking for the color of it, we're going to go fairly dark. So if I sample this color here, maybe drop it a little bit like that. That could work. I'm going to round out the corners a little bit. And what I might want to do is kind of pull in. If you noticed, we have this nice gradient up here on this text, and we're also using that gradient over here, right? So I may want to pull in something like that, and actually can copy this to my clipboard, hop over here, select the shape. I'm going to duplicate it, paste that. Let's make sure that the corner radius is the same. We'll do about 8 pixels. I'm going to move this gradient behind and then enlarge it a little bit. Something like that. And then just tweak the corners just a little bit so that it visually matches nicely, right? There we go. And again, because we're editing inside of the default state, if I go to my hover state, that active indicator is now available still, right? Beautiful. Now, one more thing you can do if you want to get a little bit fancy, and it really depends on what your design looks like, but you can add a little bit of a background blur as well to this particular navigation bar, just because we can, right? So right down here at the bottom, I can enable a background blur. Now, at the moment, there's nothing really behind this navigation bar, right? So you're not going to see much. So if I drop this to 0, it's going to look essentially identical the way it did before. But if I hover, now we've got some fanciness going on, right? I'll brighten this a little bit. Look at that. Fancy. And then this slider at the bottom is the effect opacity. So if I wanted to bring back some of the original color, which is the fill color, I can just pull this on up a little bit. And you're going to notice when I do launch the preview one more, and then I hover over top, it's subtle, more subtle, right? Because it's bringing back some of that fill color, and the actual background blur isn't as strong, which is really nice. Yeah, kind of digging that. What do y'all think? All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the navigation bar. Again, like I mentioned, the icons look a little bit small, or a little bit large, I should say. But that should be a relatively simple fix if we just dive in here, again, in the default state. Drop that on down a little bit. Oops, I missed one. And then friends down here. I think that's looking a little bit better, right? Let's see. Jesse's saying, I love background blur, but web devs seem to push back on it a lot. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I also don't blame them. It's not that it's very difficult to implement. A lot of times it's, a CSS property, sometimes JavaScript, but it is resource intensive sometimes. So, depending on how much you want to optimize your website, something like a background blur may not make sense. But if you're designing something like this for a console or a television experience, right? You don't have to worry so much about that because the consoles are essentially all going to be the same, right? An Xbox One X or whatever the latest one is, right? The hardware across all of those consoles is identical. So you really only have to test this and optimize it for one console. But if you're designing a website, you have to test and optimize for millions of different PCs and Macs and configurations and all that stuff. So it's a lot harder to get away with something fancier like this on a website because there's so much going into it. You also have to consider, bandwidth and all that fun stuff, right? Things to consider. All right, let's actually fill in some additional information. Up here we might want another avatar. So I'm going to hop over to Finder, boop, and let's grab this guy up here. And then we might want some additional icons as well. So like we did before, bell, nope, notification, nope, there it is. Ooh, this one has a little thing at the top. This one does not. This one does not have the little humps on the side. These are big questions. They make it so difficult. All right, I'm gonna grab this one here. Actually gonna drag it directly in, change the color to white. And then we might want one for chat or message. And then finally, we might want another one for our friends. Perfect. All right. So things are looking pretty good, right? All of a sudden it's starting to take shape. We've added some images. We've added some icons. We've added a navigation bar that automatically expands. Added a lot of different things. Now, one thing I mentioned last week is we might also want the ability for this particular section to expand. So if you are on this page here and you want to see more about this game, or you might want to download it or whatever it might be, there might be a button here to expand it, or an arrow or of some sort, right? So we might want to do that. I'm going to move this over a touch. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're still in our default state. So I'm on the featured section, and down at the bottom, we might want to add in maybe a container so that everything is nicely contained inside of this particular area, right? And I'm just checking questions. All right, looks like we're good. Perfect. All right, so inside, again, of this default state, we want to add some additional information. Now, the reason I'm doing it inside the default state is because when we do activate the expanded state, we want all that information to come up. So it has to exist across the default state and the expanded state. So diving in here, I'm going to grab my rectangle and I'll draw out a shape like this. And this is another area where we can probably get a little bit fancier with something like a background blur, right? So I'm going to change the color to black and then activate a background blur. We'll drop the brightness a little bit, bump up the effect opacity, really bump up the blur. We want to keep this very subtle. And the reason we want to keep it subtle is because there's going to be a lot of information on top of it. There's going to be text, some of it's large, some of it's small, there'll be buttons. And if we have something that looks like this, right, it's going to be very difficult to add information on top of this and have all of it visible and readable, right? So we want to keep this background blur nice and subtle, just with a little bit of color coming on in there. And I'm going to round out the corners a touch. Let's try about 16, looks pretty good. I'm going to make sure that this is towards the back so that we will eventually be able to move this text downwards a little bit. And then we may also want something similar to these thumbnails, but down at the bottom, but a little bit larger, right? So I'm gonna just actually grab these, duplicate them. I will make them larger. Something like that. That might be too much. Maybe not. It might work. There we go. I'll just kind of pop these right about here. And then possibly in this area here, we may want a very quick description of maybe what this game is. So I'll just drag out this text area. This will be a description of the game. Get ready to race and compete. Something like that, right? And then for the actual styling of this text, because it's more, body text, we might want to drop the weight a little bit, not too much. And then maybe I'll bump the size up a touch, and then also the line height as well, just so it's nice and readable, right? And then maybe I'll add in one more line just to fill out this section. And then over here to the right-hand side, we may want to include some additional information about this particular game. So I'm going to hide this for now. And then, we might want to start it off with a header, get ready to race. Maybe I will bump this size or the weight up and the size. Let's add a little bit of a break. And then right in this area here, this might be the area where you actually download this game. So if we do something like, we already created a component last week for our download buttons, but if we create a nice large button here, maybe we'll change up the color a little bit so it's nice and vibrant so users can see it. Round out the corners a touch, possibly. There's definitely different ways we can experiment and display this button. But for now, we'll do something like this, something nice and simple. There we go. It's not the greatest looking button in the world, but it'll do for now. We only have a few minutes left. It's probably also way too big. All right. Did we make squircles? And I missed it. We did not make squircles today, but if you do want to make squircles or super ellipses, there is a plugin called Super Ellipse that will let you very easily make lovely squircles. All right, just filling in some of this information over here, just so we have something on here that we'll be able to transition to once the expanded state is created. I think for this, the rounded corners just didn't make sense. It's difficult to line things up visually. So I'm actually going to pull these corners back to something like that. And then possibly down below, there might be some additional information about the game, maybe, if it's region locked or not. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to just add in some very simple placeholders right here, right? Just to fill out this information or this section. All right, so we have all this information that's eventually going to be present on the expanded state, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure to select all this information. Thumbnails, the container in the background. So all this information, I missed the thumbnails. There we go. And I want to pop this all into a group just to keep everything organized. So Command and Control G, I'm going to call this expanded, and I want to make sure to move this to the back. And then for the default state, I'm actually going to just grab this, pull this all down like that. And what you're obviously going to notice, very similar to the navigation bar, is all of this is still visible, right? But we definitely don't want all of this visible. So we're going to utilize another mask. So if I go ahead and just grab this featured image in the background, exactly like I did with the navigation bar, duplicate it, move it to the top. I'll call this mask. Now, one thing you'll notice is if I do the same process as we did before, select all this information, object, it's grayed out, right? You may run into this because technically this image or this shape already has an image inside of it. So it's already kind of acting like a mask. It cannot be used as another mask. So all you have to do is with this selected, just change the color to basically anything. We can choose the ugliest color on earth. I don't know what the ugliest color is, but something like this is ugly. And then select all this information, and now we will be able to mask with shape. And all the expanded information down at the bottom is now nicely hidden. And what's great is if I go to the other states, looks like nothing has changed, right? But the mask was applied, all the expanded information is down at the bottom, so everything was pushed to all of our other states, which is great. And now that that's done, we can go ahead and create that expanded state. So I'm going to hit the plus button, create a new state, expanded, and now I can dive in here, grab the mask, pull it on down, grab the expanded group, pull this on up, and then make any changes that are necessary. Something like that. These thumbnails we probably don't need because we do have the thumbnails at the bottom, so I'll just drag those on out. This information here looks pretty good. I might want to space this out a little bit more. Again, this is all placeholder for now until we have some more time to add in some more information. There we go. And then possibly I might also want to grab this image here and just expand it full width, or full height, I should say. There we go, right? So now from our default state, the big question is how do we actually access that information? Now, like I mentioned, you can put a button down here to learn more. You can put an arrow that points downwards, or you can just have this entire section be clickable, right? I would probably prefer some sort of a button or an arrow, but for the sake of time, we're gonna hop into prototype mode. We'll select this entire image in the background, and we'll click on the blue handle to the right, and then we're gonna choose our expanded state. Now, unlike the other transitions, a simple transition with no animation won't make sense, right? We want that animation. So we're gonna choose auto animate, and we're gonna choose, let's go for something like ease in and out with maybe 0.6 seconds. Might be a little bit too slow, but we'll see what that looks like. And if we press play, like we did before, we can cycle through these various photos, and now we can click to show the expanded view, right? And then from the expanded view, we need a way to go back. Now, ideally, there would be either, an X close button at the top right-hand corner, or if you're on the console, you would use the what's it called? The B button or the X button or whatever it might be that you're using. But again, for now, we'll just go ahead and grab the entire container, default state. So now, expand and go back, right? And I think I might want to tweak that background blur just a little bit, just so I have a little bit more color popping in here. Ooh, there we go, right? Very subtle. And I want to make sure to apply this to the default state as well. So one more time. Fancy, right? And of course, we also have our navigation bar. So we can expand this and then have our navigation bar, and we just have background blurs on background blurs. And like Jesse mentioned earlier, your developers will probably hate you at this point. That's what I do, right? But seriously, talk with your developers. See what they like, see what they don't like, see what they're able to do, see what they're not able to do. Work together with them. It'll just make the world a better place, at least for designers and engineers. So that's gonna wrap it up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. No masterclass next week, but we will be back the week after that, continuing, probably tackle a completely different screen within this experience. But stick around in just a few minutes. Kyle T. Webster's coming up, and he's a bit of a celebrity now. He was featured in the Apple keynote, which is wonderful. So stick around for that. Very talented, and I will see you all next time.